Welcome to the 4th edition of my episode breakdown series, where I explain what happens in each episode of HBO's House of the Dragon TV show. The episode is titled King of the Narrow Sea, which is a nod to Daemon Targaryen's newly acquired title after his recent victory over the Triarchy. It opens at the seat of Storm's End, where Rhaenyra is courting a long line of suitors who wish to take her hand in marriage. In the previous episode, Rhaenyra was rejecting the idea of marriage altogether, so Viserys gave her the freedom to choose her own match as a form of compromise. And while Rhaenyra is participating in the process of finding herself a husband, she's offended by the type of men who have lined themselves up for consideration. And after a petty comment from Gerald Bracken escalates into a violent confrontation, Rhaenyra makes an early exit and decides to sail back home, thus ending her tour 2 months early. And by doing so, she not only slighted her host, but potentially hundreds of other lords and knights who were prepared to propose later in the tour. This tour that was arranged by her father would have presumably taken her throughout Westeros in search of a match. Rhaenyra will find out later in this episode that the opinion of the masses will matter if she's to become the queen, and up to this point, she's been building a reputation of being a bratty teenager, quick to insult others and notorious for rejecting her duty, as we saw in episode 3 and in the early scenes of this one. After a 3.5-year absence, Daemon arrives in King's Landing as King of the Narrow Sea. Viserys summons the rest of the court to receive him in the throne room. Over the past few years, there's been a tension between the brothers, despite their distance from each other. A few years ago, Daemon named himself Prince of Dragonstone and claimed the ancient seat of House Targaryen as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, which was a direct insult to Viserys and his named heir, Rhaenyra. And by actively participating in the war for the Stepstones, Daemon went against his brother's wish of leaving Westeros out of a war with the Triarchy, which further drove a wedge between them. Of course, Otto was there to make sure that they remained distant, denying the king his wish of confronting Daemon at Dragonstone and constantly whispering anti-Daemon propaganda in his ear. House Hightower is more powerful than ever. Otto remains the hand of the king, and while his two rivals at court were at war, his daughter became the queen, and they now have a direct connection to the king's firstborn son. Even so, Otto isn't happy to see Daemon return, and Viserys is unsure of how to read the situation. He has no choice but to publicly accept his brother's new pledge of loyalty to the crown, because at the end of the day, Daemon did the crown a favor by ridding the Stepstones of the Triarchy, and deep down, Viserys wants to reconcile with his brother. Daemon came back to King's Landing as a war hero, having proved his worth to Viserys. But making peace with his brother was only the first step to accomplishing his hidden motive. In the very next scene, it's apparent that Daemon has an eye on Rhaenyra. But while he and Viserys are reminiscing on simpler times, Alicent and Rhaenyra seem to connect for the first time in years. She shines light on Rhaenyra's situation, telling her how much of a privilege it is to have a choice between so many suitors. In saying so, she might be projecting some feelings of envy, because Rhaenyra is overlooking a privilege that Alicent didn't have. Rhaenyra counters by saying that those suitors don't truly want her, but rather what they would gain by marrying her, and she doesn't want to suffer the fate of every highborn lady in Westeros. Her comments seem to offend Alicent, because living in a castle and squeezing out heirs is exactly what she's done over the past few years, and you can see it in her face that she most likely didn't want things to be this way for her. But despite their differences, they're able to share in their feelings of solitude over the past few years without each other. Daemon is absorbing the peace of the Godswood before Rhaenyra breaks his trance. She gets straight to the point by asking him why he came back to King's Landing. Even she can tell that he has an ulterior motive up his sleeve. Little does she know that Daemon came back to King's Landing for her. His plan to take her to wife is officially underway when he begins to lecture her about the extent of a political marriage, and the freedom that could be accessed outside of it. However, this is a more complicated matter for Rhaenyra. She's expected to strengthen her line by giving birth, and she's already seen her mother die as a result of this duty. This philosophy that Daemon is promoting can spell trouble for Rhaenyra. While it's not an evil ideology in of itself, Rhaenyra has a lot on the line tied to her reputation, and all of that can be ruined by her making the wrong decisions. But of course, Daemon doesn't take his time to make sure Rhaenyra is aware of that. At the next meeting of the small council, We can see that Rhaenyra now has a seat at the table, and is no longer their designated cupbearer. The topic of discussion is Corlys Velaryon, who doesn't seem eager to share in the spoils of war recently won with his victory over the Triarchy. To make matters worse, Corlys plans to wed his daughter Laena to the first son of the Sea Lord of Braavos. The potential alliance between House Velaryon and the Free City of Braavos is enough to cause major concern, and Otto's already suggesting that they're going to have to make a proposal of their own to stop this from happening. It's interesting that Hober Hightower was the one that delivered this message to Otto. Old Town is located on the opposite side of the continent from Driftmark. This might be another implication that their house may have an extra set of eyes and ears with the Maesters of Old Town. Corlys is still wounded from the rejection of his marriage proposal that happened years ago. In order to win him over, Viserys is going to have to swallow his pride and make a generous offer. At the end of the episode, we learn that he plans to propose a marriage between Rhaenyra and his son Laenor, with the intention of bringing the Velaryons back into the fold and finally putting an end to Rhaenyra's matchmaking campaign. Later that night, Daemon sneaks into Rhaenyra's room and leaves a letter with instructions on how to escape using a secret passage. The construction of the Red Keep was finished during the reign of Maegor the Cruel, and he had secret tunnels and passageways built throughout the castle in order to escape should he ever need it. We've already seen Daemon put this knowledge to good use before, and now he's sharing this secret with Rhaenyra so that she could join him for a night out in the city. Perhaps for the first time ever, Rhaenyra is able to experience what it's like to be around the common folk in her disguise as a normal person. Eventually, her and Daemon run into a street show that's portraying the royal family. The show is a comedic play on the line of succession, and Rhaenyra is shocked to see the reality of her public reception. The overwhelming majority of the crowd is in favor of Aegon, simply because he's a boy. Rhaenyra tries to downplay their significance by stating that their opinions are of no consequence. But the truth can be applied to not only the common folk, but the High Lords of Westeros as well. As Varys once said in Game of Thrones, power resides where men believe it resides. Viserys may have named Rhaenyra his heir, but if everyone else believes that Aegon would be the better ruler, Rhaenyra will have no power or influence. After the show, Daemon takes Rhaenyra into a pleasure house. Rhaenyra's been led to believe that sex is intertwined with marriage, a duty that needs to be done in order to produce heirs. But Daemon intends to show her the other side of things, by showing her that sex can be done in the name of passion and desire. Ironically enough, while Rhaenyra is experiencing her first sexual interaction, Alicent receives a late night call from Viserys. Alicent has some form of familiarity with Viserys, but there's no real romance in their relationship. We get the impression that every time she has sex with Viserys, she's simply playing her part in their arranged marriage. There are no feelings of pleasure or intimacy from her side. While she's stuck in the very role that Rhaenyra refuses to be in, Daemon is breaking Rhaenyra out of the idea that she has to follow the rules of marriage by showing her how people take what they want. And as Rhaenyra and Daemon are hooking up, Rhaenyra starts to build confidence in her sexuality. It's likely that in her one experience with Daemon, she was able to explore her sexuality in ways that Alicent never has with Viserys. However, when she gets too aggressive, Daemon gets turned off and abandons her. Rhaenyra was left with a lot to be desired, and because Daemon couldn't finish what he started, she set her eyes on Sir Criston Cole. Rhaenyra has built a relationship with Criston over the past few years. In the previous episode, he was there for her when she felt like no one else was, and he seems to understand her in a way that no other man in her life can, besides maybe Daemon. What started off as a simple night out with Daemon has escalated into a sexual encounter with a Knight of the Kingsguard. And while Rhaenyra has a lot more to lose than Criston, there are many consequences that can be had from their decisions. As the crowned princess, Rhaenyra is expected to save herself for her future husband, and if people found out that she had sex out of wedlock, she may lose all hope in finding a political match. As a Knight of the Kingsguard, breaking an oath of chastity can lead to gelding and even death. And as Rhaenyra's sworn protector, Criston is supposed to defend her honor. He seems to know better than to put everything on the line for the both of them at first, but in the end, he gives in to temptation. Daemon wakes up the next morning extremely hungover to see that Mysaria gave him a place to crash overnight, with the implication that they no longer share the relationship they once had. Last time we saw Mysaria, she felt betrayed when Daemon put her life in danger by lying to the king about the extent of their relationship. She's since left the business of sex work in place of selling information, independent of Daemon, and established herself as the White Worm. One of her spies ended up telling Otto what happened with Rhaenyra the night before, in exchange for money. We then see Otto contemplate before confronting Viserys about the information he bought from Mysaria. This moment serves as a huge turning point in Otto's tenure as Hand. If things go in his favor, then his grandson will soon be the heir to the Iron Throne. But if he overplays his hand, the king may call him out for being overly ambitious. He knows that this conversation won't be easy or comfortable to get through, and Viserys certainly doesn't make things easy for him. Otto intends to spare him the details of what happened, but because of the magnitude of the accusation, Viserys wants to hear all of it. In the end, Otto was unable to convince Viserys that Rhaenyra was guilty of her accusations, but he successfully planted seeds of doubt in his head. Later that day, Alicent summons Rhaenyra to the Godswood to confront her about what happened the night before. The accusations that had been levied against Rhaenyra only mention word of her behavior with Daemon in a pleasure house. Her encounter with Criston Cole is still a secret. Rhaenyra uses this to her advantage by denying the worst of the accusations, but admitting to visiting a brothel with Daemon. Alicent is disappointed in her, but she's able to find peace in the fact that Rhaenyra remains untouched. However, Alicent may be hiding her true feelings on the matter. Perhaps she's envious of the fact that she's forced to sacrifice herself in the name of duty, while Rhaenyra is out doing as she pleases. On the other hand, Alicent broke Rhaenyra's trust once before by hiding the relationship between her and Viserys, and while their friendship has recovered as of late, Rhaenyra clearly doesn't trust Alicent with the truth here. This puts their relationship at a crossroads because of the potential consequences that can result from Alicent finding out that she lied. Hooking up with Daemon has put Rhaenyra in a position to be guilty of incest and adultery, two sins that can severely damage her political reputation and put an end to any potential marriage alliances. Later on, Daemon is confronted by Viserys. He chooses to run with a lie of his own by letting Viserys think that he had sex with Rhaenyra, which seemed to be his plan all along. By hooking up with Rhaenyra in a public setting, Daemon intended to ruin her reputation to put himself in position to marry her himself. Doing so would allow him to potentially rule the realm by her side as her consort. However, Viserys doesn't buy into this idea. He's furious that Daemon is willing to ruin Rhaenyra's reputation for his own personal gain. He's already upset with Rhaenyra over the fact that she's been making it difficult to find herself a political match. And now his brother comes along and adds fuel to the fire by potentially ruining her political status altogether. Viserys is also angry with himself for defending Daemon throughout his life, when he seems to prove his doubters right time and time again. In his fury, he exiles Daemon from King's Landing again, commanding him to go back to the Vale. Rhaenyra's next interaction features her father. Viserys reintroduces the Song of Ice and Fire as a reminder that they have a responsibility to the realm that's bigger than themselves. Rhaenyra's recent behavior has the potential to divide the realm, and to prevent her from realizing this fate, Viserys decides to take matters into his own hands by announcing the name of her future husband. By marrying Rhaenyra to Laenor, Viserys intends to bring the Velaryons back into the fold and put an end to Rhaenyra's courtship, which would effectively solve two of his biggest political issues at once. However, before their conversation ends, Rhaenyra proposes a power move of her own by exposing Otto Hightower for what he is. Viserys agrees to dismiss Otto and strip him of his title as Hand. He accuses him of conspiring to murder his father for his own personal gain, and strategically using Alicent to comfort him when he was at his most vulnerable. Viserys' father was Baelon Targaryen, the second son of Jaehaerys Targaryen, the king before Viserys. In Fire and Blood, he was the hand of the king for about a year before passing away of a burst belly. But the showrunners decided to make his death even more suspicious by having him pass away from the same cause, just 5 days after being named Hand. Openly accusing Otto of his death after so many years is a bold assumption, but calling him out for using Alicent as his political pawn was even bolder. Otto openly denies these accusations, but it's very obvious that at the very least he calculated Alicent becoming queen. Anyhow, Viserys can now see that Otto has been making moves for his own political gain throughout his tenure as Hand. But after speaking his mind, he officially strips Otto of his title. This is a loss for Otto, but the effect from his calculations were already well underway. Viserys can remove Otto from his station, but he can't remove Alicent from court under a just cause, and he already has 2 children by her. Not only that, but he also succeeded in creating a new conflict between Daemon and Viserys, who were on their way to being reconciled. The episode closes with Grand Maester Mellos giving Rhaenyra moon tea. Moon tea is a form of birth control for women in Westeros, but we don't actually see Rhaenyra drinking it before the episode ends, leaving us to decide for ourselves whether or not she followed through with it. That's it for me. Thank you for watching this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more content like this. Peace.